My goal is to read 12 books a year. That is one book a month. Seems like an average, attainable amount. My stretch goal is to read 2 books per month, and this year I'm off to a good start. I was able to read 6 books from January through March. Here are the 6 books, and I kind of feel like talking about them for a little bit. So the first one is Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet by Jamie Ford. The story opens in 1986 with a Chinese American man named Henry who is in his 50s, and he learns that an old hotel which has been boarded up for decades and was once the gateway to the Japantown in Seattle, Washington, it's been discovered that there are belongings of Japanese American families that have been stored in the basement since World War II, when they were incarcerated in internment camps. The book switches from Henry's present day in 1986 to back in the 1940s when he was growing up in the Seattle area. And his best friend was a Japanese girl named Keiko, and her family ends up being incarcerated in an internment camp and they lose touch. I struggled a little with this book as it does hit close to home and it seems all too relevant for the times that we're in right now. My family was also incarcerated in an internment camp during World War II, and my grandfather was a lot older than Henry in the story and his friend, but I couldn't help but imagine him going through some of the same things. So yes, there is a personal aspect to the story and the connection that I have to it. And overall, I really liked it, even if it was a little difficult to read. There were some moments where I couldn't wait to get to the next page to see what would happen, but overall, there are pretty predictable character and story arcs. But yes, it is a bittersweet story, and it's about fathers and sons and young friendship and love that is muddled by racism. So it includes obviously historical details, especially about Seattle in the 1940s. I'm in the Pacific Northwest, so that was also very interesting to me. I also think it's hard to capture the feelings and the perspective of a kid writing as an adult, but I think the author does a fairly decent job of that, especially given the heavy subject matter. So I rated this 3.5 stars. Next, I read Worn, A People's History of Clothing by Sophie Thanhauser. I'm probably not saying that correctly. This was also a struggle to read, just not very settling nighttime reading again. The author writes about how the fabric of our clothing, silk, cotton, linen, wool, and synthetics, is woven into the fabric of our lives. The fast fashion that we know today and the environmental impact on the planet has its roots in the very beginnings of the textile industry, which has always relied on worker exploitation, misogyny, colonialism, to quote a review on the back of the book. But the author also talks about a growing interest in ancestral and ethical methods of clothing production. It's both fascinating and dense. There's just so much history and so many layers of human innovation and survival and thrival, followed by decimation of land and nature, people, culture. So it's not a light read, but I think it's an important one. I rated it 3.5 stars, and that's mostly just probably me because it was difficult to read some of the technical aspects of clothing production and some of the history. So that definitely is more to do with me and not the author's lack of effort and research and finesse on the subject. And the third book I read is definitely lighter reading, and that is More Home Cooking by Lori Colwin. This is the follow-up to her first book, Home Cooking, and it took me, I think, about 9 years from reading that book to read this follow-up, which is a long time because I really loved Home Cooking. The follow-up, More Home Cooking, just isn't as charming, but it's still enjoyable. I mean, Colwyn's whole thing is you got to eat, so you might as well get comfortable in the kitchen. She shares recipes and stories and just little life tips. There are short chapters on the wonders of lemons and limes, coffee and tomatoes, to name a few. And she was writing mostly, I think, in the 80s and the early 90s, so some of it might seem a little dated, like not being able to find a certain spice or the difficulty of shopping for organic ingredients. But overall, it's just a cozy read, and if anything, it just renewed my love and appreciation for food items and being able to cook with them. And so I rated this 3.5 stars. Number 4 is Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. And she is one of my favorite writers. Her debut short story collection called Interpreter of Maladies is one of my all-time favorite books. I've read a couple of her other earlier books as well. This one is her latest, which came out in 2021. It was originally written in Italian, which Lahiri started studying, I think, in 2012 when she moved to Italy. And I believe she wrote one other book in the Italian language. So then she wrote this and also translated it herself into English. This is a very quick read. They're short chapters, little diary entries, which I like. But I think was expecting something more. I don't know, it just didn't have the same richness and details as some of her other books. I mean, there really are some lovely lines in the book, just glimpses of something deeper, but they just stayed on the surface. So I rated it a 3.5 stars because I think some of her other work is stronger. And coming in at number 5 is Victoria College by D.E. Stevenson. Cozy English country novels from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s really got me out of a very long reading rut several years ago, and I'm still hooked. Middlebrow and Dean Street Press have been reprinting a lot of those kinds of books in recent years, just a ton of them, and they all have like a similar cover and everything, so that does get a little confusing. But I read, I think, all of their editions of Elizabeth Fair novels. So a while ago I decided to try a few other authors and ordered some books, all to varying success. But this one was one of the successful reads. And actually, when I first received the books, I tried to read this one and I couldn't get into it. But then for some reason, one day in February, I picked it up and then I couldn't put it down. So it's about a woman named Caroline who lives in an English village in a family home called Victoria Cottage. She is a widow with 3 grown children and a sister that visits, and neighbors and newcomers who bring challenges and joyful moments as well. I just thought it was really funny and witty, and the dialogue is engaging and feels real, but not in a mundane way, which is very important. There are, of course, elements of the tried and true romance variety, but that's kind of what you sign up for with these cozy novels, right? So I rated this a solid 4 stars. And last but certainly not least, I read Persuasion by Jane Austen. Persuasion was another book that I bought several years ago and just couldn't get into it, but I knew I would give it another try at some point, and this last March just was the right time. The main character is Anne Elliot, who is in her late 20s and still very sad about the proposal she was persuaded to turn down 8 or 9 years before. And by numerous coincidences, she comes face to face again with the man that she had rejected. So, the first half of the book was difficult for me. I thought it just read very clunky, and I almost wanted to give up, but I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did, because the second half of the novel just brightens up and the story picks up pace, and I actually even liked the characters better. So that is the third Austen book that I've read, and I hope to read the others. But I'm rating that one 3 stars because the first half of the book was a slog to get through. I'm super happy that I was able to read 6 books so far this year. And actually, I'm filming this late March, so I'm ahead of schedule. But I did take a couple of days to just enjoy the fact that I am on a good reading streak, and to think about the books that I have read and what I want to try to read for the rest of the year. So just a couple of days ago, I started reading another book. I guess it's the theme for the year. It's another one that I attempted to read years ago, and I think I got 120 pages into it, and for some reason I stopped reading. It's kind of a longer book, and then it sat in a box waiting to be taken to the waiting to be donated, and I've been decluttering and organizing and everything, and so when it was time to take that box, I picked up the book, and I thought, oh, maybe I feel like reading this. So I hope I actually finish it this time. It's I think 500 pages or something. So we'll see. I have a bit of extra time if I count that for April. I did most of my reading at night before bedtime. I would try to read at least 30 minutes. Sometimes it ended up being only 15 minutes if I was really tired. And sometimes for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. I've been trying to do that instead of scrolling through my phone. I think it's improved not only just my reading habits, but my sleep patterns and just overall mental health, really. So that also helped get me into this new reading routine. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to me talk about books. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you want to give one of them a try, or what is on your book list next. And happy reading.